Hello everyone. On this video, we are going to discuss the objectives for week 2, and this is going to be lecture 1 out of 3 for week 2. So this is just my way of breaking things up for you so it can be a little bit more digestible. Okay, so the objectives for this week is going to be speak more about your interests, activities, and experiences. And this is going to involve quite a bit of vocabulary, so you might have to learn a few words that you might not know. Grammar. We are going to discuss and start learning more about verb conjugation in the present tense. So these are things you normally do every day or in general. And 3, we're going to do vocabulary. A lot of this is just going to be memorizing this vocabulary, and it's going to be expressions to show frequency, so how often you do something. And with talking about how often you do something in activities, you're also going to have to discuss where you do these activities, so you'll have to learn some names for places that you frequent, like school, a restaurant, something like that, at home. Okay, so let's get started. So these are just some things that I think are important to review before you dive into conjugations and verbs and regular and irregular, and some terms that you may not often use, but you may or may not know what they mean. So here's my quick grammar point. So this is just the basics. So what is a verb? A verb is an action that we do. For example, eat, drink, watch. In Spanish, we call these verbos. Some examples of these verbos are trabajar, which means to work, comer, which means to eat, and vivir, which means to live. So in Spanish and in English, we have 2 types of verbs, and these are going to be regular and irregular. So regular verbs are, you can say, are verbs that follow common conjugation rules. So the way I remember which one is which, if it's regular, it follows the rules. Irregular verbs do not always follow common conjugation rules. So you will eventually, the more you use them, you'll kind of notice some patterns, but while you notice the patterns, they may not always apply to all the regular verbs. So in Spanish, we also have regular and irregular verbs. So here's a couple of examples of regular and irregular verbs in English, so you can kind of get the idea. For example, a regular verb in English is watch. This is a regular verb because to use this verb, sometimes we add the ed ending, and sometimes we add the ing ending, and we can use it in different tenses. So I watched in the past, I watch in the present, I am watching in present continuous, I will have watched future perfect. And the rules are that I can add ed or ing based on what I want to express. An irregular verb in English would be go. For example, in the past, I went. In the present, I go. I am going is present continuous, but future perfect is I will have gone. So you can see that the verb go changes depending on what tense I'm talking about in the verb. So it can become went, go, going, or gone, which is a lot of different changes. So while I can add ing to this verb, I cannot add ed, and they change completely. They become different words. So this is just an example of an irregular verb. Very similarly, in Spanish, we also have regular and irregular verbs. So all of our verbs in Spanish have 3 endings. They have an AR ending, an ER ending, and an IR ending. Okay, so one of the things here, almost all the AR verbs are going to be regular. Almost all the ER verbs are irregular, and less than half of all the IR verbs are irregular. So this gives you an idea of how many of these verbs will have rules that apply to them, but how many of them you will probably have to memorize or study a little bit more to get the hang of them. So here are some examples of Spanish verbs, and these are just examples that the book uses. Trabajar means to work, and it has an AR ending. Comer is to eat, and it has an ER ending. And vivir has an IR ending, and vivir means to live. So notice that these verbs are not conjugated, right? To work, to eat, to live. I am not speaking about who is doing the action yet. So in Spanish, you can memorize the pattern for the regular verbs, which would fit most of the AR verbs. But some of the ER and IR verbs are going to be irregular. So for those, you kind of just need to memorize some of these, especially if they're very commonly used, or just simply the more you use them, the more you'll get used to using them correctly. And you might get corrected by me, you might get corrected by a Spanish speaker, but you know, practice makes perfect. We will not talk about conjugating these verbs yet, but I wanted to make sure that you can identify the verbs and what they look like in Spanish. So it's very important that when you are learning a language, you can relate to the things you're talking about. So you are more likely to learn something if you relate to it in your personal life. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to grab a piece of paper and a pencil or pen and draw a table with 3 columns. So the first column is going to talk about a verb or an activity that you do and maybe some extra words. It's very important that you try to learn phrases rather than just verbs, because it'll help you make more sense of what something means. For example, verb, in my case, I wrote read the news, eat lunch, watch movies. So quick phrases, chunks of words rather than a single word. The place, at home, at school, at the movie theater. How often? Every day, twice a week, on the weekend. So go ahead and write at least 10 activities that you kind of do in general, you know, every week. And go ahead and pause the video while you write this down. You are supposed to write these in English, and then we will translate them in Spanish. Okay, and I'm guessing you just finished your activities. Some of these may look like this, and some of them might look slightly different. So although we try to shy you away from translating, sometimes you just need to do it, and sometimes, you know, you don't need to do it. So this is a time where I would recommend you to get back into Spanish to translate. One of the things we use to translate is the word reference website, and this word reference website, it's very good because it actually, you can translate phrases and you can translate things, and it gives you a lot of depth into the language. So here's my example. I read the news, which I would say leer, this is the verb, leer las noticias. Eat lunch, comer el almuerzo. Watch movies, ver películas. Where do I do these activities? At home, en la casa, at school, en la escuela, or at the movie theater, en el cine. How often? Every day, todos los días, twice a week, 2 veces a la semana, on the weekend, en los fines de semana. So another thing you can do is look at page 174 of your book, and they give you some verbs and phrases. You're welcome to use those, but again, if these do not relate to your everyday life, you might not memorize them because they don't really matter that much to you. So go ahead and translate your 10 activities, and feel free to use Word Reference, the website, to translate different things. So this is the end of lecture 1, and make sure you translate and complete the chart with the activities that you chose. The second thing I want you to do is, now that you know that our Spanish verbs have 3 categories, 3 endings, AR, ER, and IR, I want you to go ahead and categorize all of these verbs. So trabajar has an AR ending, so put it under AR. Comer has an ER ending, put it under ER. Vivir has an IR ending, put it under IR. And this will be just a good way for you to kind of, you know, be aware of which verbs end in what ending. And then if you happen to look up any new verbs from your activities, go ahead and add those up too. Again, just the 3 categories in Spanish. And that's it. Thank you for watching.